What would you do if you discovered your life was built on lies? For Sharon Reed, the truth came in pieces. A hotel receipt, a whiff of unfamiliar perfume, whispered phone calls late at night. After 22 years of marriage, she found herself invisible to the man who once vowed to love her forever. But instead of crumbling under betrayal, Sharon began unraveling secrets far darker than infidelity. Hidden accounts, stolen pensions, and millions in fraudulent schemes. This is a story of heartbreak turned into triumph, where one woman's quiet determination dismantled an empire, and proved that sometimes revenge doesn't roar. It whispers from the shadows until justice finds its way. It all began on a quiet Tuesday evening, one that should have been ordinary but ended up unraveling the carefully constructed facade of Sharon Reed's life. The air was thick with autumn chill as she stood in their spacious laundry room, sorting through Adam's freshly dry-cleaned suits, the same ritual she had performed every week for over 2 decades. But this time something caught her eye, a small slip of paper tucked into the inner pocket of his charcoal gray suit jacket. A hotel receipt. The Overlook Hotel. Room 1204. Champagne service. Strawberries. And there it was, the date scrawled at the top, October 15th. Their anniversary. Sharon froze, her hands trembling slightly as she held the evidence of betrayal between her fingers. While she had spent that night alone, curled up on the couch with takeout and a bottle of wine meant to celebrate their 22 years together, Adam had been celebrating elsewhere, with Linda, his executive assistant. Linda, who was barely older than their daughter would have been if they'd ever had children. Linda, whose perfect hair and dazzling smile graced the company Christmas party photos last December. Linda, who laughed too loudly at Adam's jokes and touched his arm just a little too often during conversations. Her heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water, sending ripples of pain through her chest. She wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, to demand answers about why he had chosen someone else over her. But instead, Sharon folded the receipt neatly and slipped it back into its hiding place. Then she resumed folding his shirts, pressing each crease with mechanical precision, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet bring herself to ask aloud. That night at dinner, Sharon studied Adam across the mahogany table they had picked out together when his business first took off, a symbol of their shared dreams and aspirations. He sat scrolling through his phone, occasionally smiling at messages from an unknown sender before tucking the device away again. His eyes never met hers. They hadn't truly connected in months, or maybe even years. Somewhere along the way she realized she had become invisible to him. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, like fading ink under sunlight. She wondered when exactly it had happened. Was it after the launch of his third major investment fund? Or perhaps during those endless charity galas where she played the role of the dutiful corporate wife so flawlessly that no one noticed how hollow she felt inside? Maybe it started earlier when he stopped discussing new clients with her or inviting her to strategy meetings. Whatever the turning point, she now understood what it meant to be erased. Not by force but by neglect. By choice. And yet, the discovery of the affair wasn't the only thing gnawing at her conscience. Over the past few months, Sharon had begun noticing other details that didn't add up. There was the faint scent of jasmine and vanilla clinging to his collar. Nothing like the subtle rose fragrance she'd worn since college. There were the late-night phone calls he took outside on the patio, his voice dropping to a hush whenever she approached. There were the credit card statements showing dinners for 2 at restaurants they'd never visited together, the second cell phone hidden in his desk drawer, the email notifications flashing across his laptop screen from accounts she didn't recognize. But most troubling of all were the numbers. The lifestyle upgrades, the vacation home in Aspen, the vintage car collection, the designer watches, seemed wildly disproportionate to the income Adam declared on their joint tax returns. When she casually mentioned an investment that appeared out of nowhere, Adam patted her hand condescendingly. "Don't worry your pretty head about the complicated stuff, Sam," he said dismissively. "I've got it handled." That moment awakened something in her. It wasn't anger, not yet, but rather a quiet determination to uncover the truth. For years she had accepted Adam's gradual exclusion of her from his world without question. First, she wasn't invited to strategy meetings. Then he stopped discussing new clients with her. By their 15th anniversary, he had established a separate business account to simplify tax matters, leaving her completely shut out of the financial side of their lives. Each erosion of their partnership had seemed insignificant at the time, but looking back, Sharon could see how systematically she had been pushed aside. Now, armed with fragments of suspicion and a growing sense of unease, she started paying closer attention. She documented discrepancies in the company financials that occasionally crossed their home fax machine. Large sums moving through shell companies, questionable deductions, revenue that seemed to vanish before making it to official reports. Every patronizing comment Adam made about her inability to understand the complexities of business fueled her resolve. Every secretive glance at his phone became another piece of the puzzle. 3 months earlier, Sharon had driven 30 miles to a public library in a neighboring county. She couldn't risk using their home computer or her personal devices. Adam had insisted on installing security software on everything they owned after a supposed corporate hack. At the library, she signed in using her maiden name and selected a computer in the far corner back to the wall. There she created a new email address, truth.finder2023@gmail.com. Generic. Untraceable. Perfect. On that first day, she uploaded only 3 documents. Copies of tax returns from 2018 that showed clear discrepancies between reported income and actual deposits. She needed to be methodical, careful. If this was going to work, the evidence had to be irrefutable. 4 weeks afterward, she developed a routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Adam had standing dinner meetings that routinely ran late. She told him she joined a book club. He was so disinterested in her activities that he never questioned it. Instead of discussing literature with suburban housewives, she spent those evenings at different libraries across the county, building her case piece by piece. One particularly rainy Tuesday, she sat in her parked car, hands trembling as she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Laura Williams speaking," answered a brisk professional voice. Laura had been her college roommate, a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering financial fraud. After reconnecting briefly, Sharon asked for advice, hypothetical advice, about documenting potential tax fraud without becoming implicated herself. Laura listened intently, offering guidance on whistleblower provisions, documentation requirements, and the importance of establishing a clear timeline. Though she never directly advised Sharon to report Adam, the framework she provided gave Sharon the confidence to take her next step. As the days turned into weeks, Sharon's investigation grew more meticulous. She contacted Professor Jody Harrington, her former business law professor, to discuss innocent spouse relief. With his help, she learned how to protect herself legally while gathering evidence against Adam. She opened a new bank account at a credit union using her maiden name and gradually transferred small amounts from her personal allowance account. She documented each instance when Adam refused to discuss company finances with her, recording dates and exact phrases in a journal she kept locked in her car. Meanwhile, Adam's carelessness grew as his relationship with Linda intensified. He left financial statements in his home office, forgot to lock his computer, and sometimes discussed questionable business practices on speakerphone, unaware she was within earshot. Each slip provided another piece for her growing file. By the time Adam finally served her divorce papers, Sharon was ready. As he pushed the documents across the dining table, his voice cold and detached, she signed them with a practiced smile. Her heart was shattered, yes, but her resolve was ironclad. Little did Adam know the next morning his world would collapse like a house of cards. For 22 years, Sharon had stood in Adam's shadow, supporting his ambitions and sacrificing her own. Now she was stepping into the light and taking him down with her. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the sun filtered through the blinds in sharp streaks of light, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of their home. Sharon had just finished brewing her first cup of coffee when she heard the familiar click of Adam's Italian leather shoes against the foyer tiles. She paused, her hands wrapped around the warmth of her mug, and turned toward the sound. He hadn't been staying at the house much lately. His nights were spent either in hotel rooms or Linda's apartment. But today he was here, standing tall in his charcoal gray power suit, the one he wore for closing deals worth millions. And beside him stood a man with wire-rimmed glasses, clutching a leather portfolio that looked far too expensive to belong to an ordinary lawyer. "Sharon," Adam said, his voice clipped and businesslike, devoid of any trace of warmth or regret. "This is Alan Grossman, my attorney." He emphasized my as if to underline the fact that this wasn't their attorney, the one they'd shared for 22 years, but someone entirely new, someone who represented only him. The distinction stung more than Sharon expected, though she hid it well behind a practiced smile. "Would either of you like some coffee?" she asked politely, maintaining the facade of normalcy that had become second nature after decades of playing the perfect corporate wife. Her tone was calm, almost serene, as if this were just another casual meeting over breakfast rather than the formal dismantling of their marriage. "We don't have time," Adam replied shortly, avoiding her gaze. His hands didn't fidget the way they normally did when he spoke from the heart, or at least pretended to. This was Adam in negotiation mode. Calculated, controlled, convincing. The man who once knew her so intimately now seemed like a stranger, treating her not as his partner but as an obstacle to be managed. Alan cleared his throat, pulling a document from his portfolio and sliding it across the kitchen island. It landed on the exact spot where, 19 years earlier, they'd popped champagne to celebrate Adam landing his first six-figure contract. Sharon remembered that night vividly. She had surprised him with his favorite meal and later they'd made love right there on the counter, drunk on success and possibility. Now the divorce papers stared up at her, sterile and official, erasing all those memories with cold efficiency. "I've been unhappy for some time, Sam," Adam began, reciting what was clearly a rehearsed speech. His eyes darted toward the door, maintaining a safe distance as if she might suddenly lose control and throw something. But Sharon remained composed, her fingers tracing the edge of the papers thoughtfully. 22 years is a long time," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It's too long to stay in something that isn't working," Adam replied without missing a beat. "We've grown apart. We want different things." She noticed how he used the word we, implying Linda somehow shared his vision for the future. Sharon's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she kept her expression neutral. She wanted to laugh bitterly at the irony. He was discarding her after 2 decades of loyalty because she no longer fit into his carefully curated image of success. Yet instead of lashing out, she simply nodded, letting him continue. "The settlement is fair," Alan interjected, pushing a separate document toward her. Sharon skimmed the terms while sipping her coffee, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The so-called fair offer was anything but generous. The beach house in North Carolina would be sold, with Adam keeping 70% of the proceeds. Their primary residence, this house she had decorated and maintained for 2 decades, would go entirely to him, giving her 60 days to relocate. There was also a one-time payment, which amounted to roughly 3 years of Adam's declared income. Most tellingly, she would relinquish all claims to his business ventures, including future earnings from investments made during their marriage. "You helped establish Reed Enterprises," Sharon said, looking directly at Adam. Her voice was soft but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "I put my career on hold. I worked without salary for 5 years." A flash of discomfort crossed Adam's face, quickly replaced by cool detachment. "That was a long time ago, Sam. The company's growth over the past 15 years has had nothing to do with you. Except it did." Sharon knew about the Henderson acquisition that doubled their market share. A deal that happened because she'd befriended Mrs. Henderson at a charity gala. She knew about the government contract secured after months of coaching Adam on his presentation skills. She knew about the initial investors who came through her father's connections. But none of that mattered now. To Adam, she was just another liability to be written off. "She understands the demands of my position," Adam continued, referring to Linda. "She shares my vision for the future." Sharon raised an eyebrow slightly, keeping her tone neutral. "She's young," she observed. "It's not about age," Adam snapped defensively. "It's about connection. About finding someone who sees the real me." The irony was almost comical. The real Adam had disappeared years ago, replaced by this hollow persona of corporate success. He couldn't even recognize how rehearsed he sounded, delivering lines that divorced men had been using for generations. Alan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Perhaps Mrs. Reed would like time to review the documents with her own attorney? "That won't be necessary," Sharon replied smoothly, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen Adam had given her on their 15th anniversary. She signed each page with a practiced smile, the kind she'd perfected at hundreds of corporate functions over the years. Their surprise was palpable. They had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps bargaining. Instead, she handed the signed papers back to Alan with a quiet, I wish you happiness, Adam. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. By tomorrow afternoon his world would collapse like a house of cards. After they left, Sharon poured herself another cup of coffee and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel the grief. Not for losing Adam, but for the years she'd lost being Mrs. Reed instead of Sharon. Then she got to work. That night was the last she'd spend in their bed. Sleep eluded her as she spread documents across the antique writing desk in her bedroom. Tax returns showing inexplicable discrepancies. Bank statements from Cayman Island accounts. Corporate ledgers with convenient errors that always benefited Adam. Photographic evidence of cash payments to building inspectors. Emails discussing creative accounting practices that crossed ethical and legal lines. For 3 years she'd been gathering evidence while pretending she didn't understand the complexities of corporate finance. Every time Adam patronizingly told her not to worry her pretty head about business matters, she'd added another document to her collection. Every time he excluded her from meetings she should have attended, she found another piece of the puzzle. By dawn her eyes were burning, but her resolve was ironclad. She organized the final package of evidence, encrypting the digital files and preparing the email that would land in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division's inbox at precisely 9 a.m. She included specifics about $28 million in fraudulent deductions, hidden income streams, and deliberate misrepresentations on tax filings over 8 consecutive years. As the sun rose, she showered and dressed carefully, selecting a simple blue dress that had always been Adam's favorite. Today marked the end of their marriage, but it also marked the beginning of her reclamation. By sunset, Adam would understand the true cost of underestimating the woman who had stood in his shadow for 22 years. At 8:30 a.m., Sharon parked in a public garage 3 towns away, paid cash for an hour of computer time, and uploaded the complete dossier to the secure IRS portal. 8 years of tax fraud. Multiple shell companies. Hidden accounts in Switzerland and the Caymans. Falsified expense reports. Cash transactions designed to avoid reporting requirements. Properties purchased through anonymous LLCs. The evidence was overwhelming. $28 million in fraudulent activity, carefully documented and annotated. As she hit send, she felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of completion. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, about consequences, about reclaiming some small measure of dignity from a man who had discarded her after 22 years as if she were nothing. 3 hours later, Adam texted to let her know he'd moved the last of his essential belongings to his temporary apartment. They both knew he meant Linda's place. He asked if she needed anything before he left the keys. She replied with a single word, no. By morning his world would change forever. Irony wasn't lost on Sharon. After years of dismissing her business acumen, it would be her meticulous documentation that brought down his empire. The woman he underestimated would be the architect of his downfall. She slept surprisingly well that night, better than she had in months. When her alarm chimed at 6:30 a.m., she rose with purpose, dressed in a simple gray suit, professional but understated, and drove downtown. Adam's office occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian building, a gleaming glass structure that dominated the skyline. She parked in the public garage 2 blocks away and walked to Maggie's Cafe, which offered a perfect view of the building's entrance. The usual Mrs. Reed? Asked Maggie herself, a 60-something woman who'd been serving downtown professionals for decades. Just Sharon today, she replied with a genuine smile. And yes, the usual. She took a window seat and sipped her latte, watching the morning rush of employees entering the building. Adam would arrive at precisely 8:15 as he had for 20 years, early enough to appear dedicated but late enough to make an entrance. His senior staff would already be there, preparing for the 8:30 meeting that started every day. At 9:47 a.m., much faster than she had anticipated, 3 unmarked sedans pulled up to the curb. 8 men and women in suits emerged, carrying briefcases and document boxes. Despite their casual appearance, something about their synchronized movements screamed federal agents. 2 uniformed police officers accompanied them, remaining by the entrance as the others proceeded inside. Sharon's phone buzzed at 9:52 a.m. Adam. She silenced it and continued watching. Through the massive glass lobby she could see security trying to contact someone upstairs. More calls came. Adam again, then his assistant Clara, then the company's general counsel. She let them all go to voicemail. At 10:14 a.m., she saw Adam himself burst from the elevator into the lobby, his face contorted with panic as he confronted the officers blocking the exit. Even from across the street she could read his body language. The aggressive gesturing, the entitled indignation, the gradual deflation as reality set in. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "What the hell is happening?" Adam's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "The IRS and FBI are here with search warrants. They're seizing computers and files. They're interviewing my staff. What do they want?" "They're claiming tax fraud, securities violations and money laundering," Sharon replied calmly. "It sounds serious." "It's nonsense. Someone's made false accusations." His breathing was erratic. "Sam, please, I need you. 17 years of building this company, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing everything." The desperation in his voice might have moved her once. Now it felt like delayed justice. "I'm rather busy today, Adam," she said truthfully. "The divorce papers were quite clear about our separation." "This isn't about the divorce," he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice. "Sam, please. I need you." She ended the call without responding. By noon, news outlets were reporting the raid on Reed Enterprises. By evening, Adam was under arrest, facing charges that would dismantle the empire he had built on lies and betrayal. Adam froze mid-step, his polished Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor as if mocking his sudden paralysis. His mind raced through possibilities. Corporate espionage? A disgruntled client? Had someone uncovered one of the smaller shell companies he used to launder money? But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't piece together what was happening. Then, as if summoned by his panic, Agent Carlos Rivera appeared, flanked by two colleagues. Their expressions were unreadable, professional masks hiding whatever storm they were about to unleash. "Adam Reed?" Rivera asked, though it wasn't really a question. "We need you to come with us." By noon, Adam sat in a sterile interrogation room, his tailored suit wrinkled from hours of restless shifting. Across the table, Agents Rivera and Wong laid out evidence that painted a damning picture of his crimes. Every document Sharon had meticulously gathered over 3 years now stared back at him, accompanied by additional findings from the SEC and FBI investigations. It wasn't just tax fraud anymore. It was securities violations, embezzlement and theft from employee pension funds. And Linda, his supposed ally, was implicated too. "What do you mean, conspiracy?" Adam demanded, his voice shaking. "Linda would never betray me." Agent Wong slid a folder across the table, revealing emails between Adam and Linda discussing creative accounting solutions. In one particularly incriminating exchange, Adam instructed Linda to ensure Sharon never saw certain accounts. Linda's reply promised complete discretion. "Miss Clark received substantial bonuses tied to these transactions," Wong explained coolly. "She also benefited personally: jewelry, a car, a down payment on her condo, all correlated with specific instances of fraudulent reporting." Adam's face drained of color. "This isn't possible. She wouldn't." But deep down he knew it was true. Linda had always been ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Her loyalty hadn't been to him but to the lifestyle he provided. Now she was cutting her losses, cooperating fully with authorities to minimize her own sentence. The betrayal cut deeper than any other wound he'd suffered, not because he cared for her, but because she had been complicit in destroying everything he'd built. As the investigation unfolded, the full extent of Adam's crimes came to light. For nearly 3 years he and Linda had systematically manipulated financial records, diverting approximately $4.3 million from the company's employee retirement accounts. They replaced legitimate investments with worthless shares in Adam's shell companies, leaving dozens of loyal employees vulnerable. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represented decades of hard work, trust, and sacrifice. People who had attended holiday parties at Adam's mansion, who had stayed late to meet deadlines, who had believed in his vision, now faced the devastating reality that their futures were stolen. Sharon learned about the pension fund scandal during a follow-up meeting with Agent Rivera and Special Agent Wong. When they explained the diversion of funds, her breath caught in her throat. Tears welled up unexpectedly, not delicate sobs but raw, guttural cries that shook her entire body. She thought of Clara, Adam's longtime assistant, who had confided in her about saving for her daughter's college education. She thought of Greg, the IT manager who often joked about retiring early to sail around the world. She thought of all the faces she recognized from company functions, people who had trusted Adam implicitly. How could he do this? Sharon whispered, clutching a tissue. These are real people, families. Agent Daniels, the assistant U.S. attorney present, leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Reed, your cooperation has been invaluable. Without your documentation, we might not have uncovered this until it was too late. It was a hollow victory. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It felt like mourning. Mourning for the man she thought she married, for the years she lost trying to support him, and for the innocent lives caught in the crossfire of his greed. 2 days later, Adam called Sharon again, his voice hollow and desperate. They're saying I stole from the pension fund, he said without preamble. They're freezing everything. They took my passport. Sharon remained silent, letting the weight of his words settle between them. This was the moment she had waited for, not for revenge but for clarity. For closure. Did you know? He finally asked. About the whistleblower? Yes, she replied softly. Goodbye, Adam. She ended the call before he could respond, her hand trembling slightly as she set the phone down. The justice system would handle the rest. Her role was done. In the weeks that followed, Adam's arraignment became public spectacle. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, capturing every detail of his descent from celebrated entrepreneur to accused criminal. Sharon attended the hearing, sitting quietly in the back row. She wore a simple navy dress, her wedding ring conspicuously absent. When Adam entered the courtroom shackled and wearing an ill-fitting suit, she barely recognized him. Gone was the charismatic man she once admired. In his place stood someone diminished, broken. Their eyes met briefly. For the first time in years, Adam truly saw her, not as an extension of himself or a convenient support system, but as Sharon, a whole person he had gradually erased. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture filled with regret and sorrow. She returned it but remained expressionless. There was nothing left to say. The proceedings were brief and procedural. Adam pleaded not guilty to 17 federal charges, including tax evasion, wire fraud, and employee benefit plan theft. The judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the risk of flight. As they led him away, he glanced back at Sharon one final time, his expression unreadable. Was it anger, sadness, or simply resignation? For Sharon, leaving the courthouse felt like shedding a heavy burden she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She walked into the bright sunlight, breathing deeply for the first time in years. The air tasted different, cleaner, freer. Justice may not have brought triumph, but it had brought peace. And peace, she realized, was enough. Over the next few months, the fallout from Adam's arrest rippled through the community. Dozens of employees filed lawsuits against Reed Enterprises, seeking compensation for their stolen pensions. Some resigned immediately, disillusioned by the betrayal. Others stayed, hoping the company could recover under new leadership. Linda disappeared from public view entirely, her name tarnished alongside Adam's. Meanwhile, Sharon focused on rebuilding her life. She leased a modest downtown apartment, furnished it with pieces she loved rather than items chosen to impress others. Her books, neglected for years, once again filled shelves. Her grandmother's quilt adorned her bed, and her collection of beach glass, gathered from vacations Adam had always been too busy to enjoy, displayed proudly in a bowl by the window. When the IRS notified her of the whistleblower reward, $4.2 million, she felt validated but detached. Money wasn't the point, reclaiming her identity was. That evening she called Laura, her college roommate, and shared her plans. I need to do something meaningful with this money, Sharon said firmly. Something that matters. 2 weeks later she filed paperwork establishing the New Beginnings Foundation, dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce and financial abuse. The foundation would provide emergency grants, legal assistance, career counseling, and financial literacy education. All the resources she wished she'd had during those first terrible days after her marriage collapsed. At the foundation's inaugural board meeting, Sharon shared her vision with the diverse group of professionals she'd assembled. Lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, and community organizers listened intently as she spoke. Many women stay in bad situations because they can't see a way out financially, she explained. We're going to change that. As spring arrived, Sharon settled into her new routines. Mornings were spent at the accounting firm analyzing financial statements and training younger staff to recognize warning signs of fraud. Afternoons were devoted to the foundation, reviewing grant applications and developing programs. Evenings were hers alone, often spent on her small balcony watching the city lights emerge as dusk fell. One afternoon she ran into Clara at a cafe near her office. Their initial exchange was awkward, but then Clara thanked her. "The employees got most of their pension funds back because of you," she said quietly. "No one blames you for what happened." Her words healed something in Sharon she hadn't realized was still wounded. She hadn't just taken revenge on Adam. She'd inadvertently protected people who would have been devastated by his actions. On the one-year anniversary of signing those divorce papers, Sharon hosted a small dinner party in her apartment. Her guests included Laura Martin, her sister from Chicago, and 2 new friends from the foundation. As they raised glasses in a toast, Sharon realized with startling clarity that she wasn't just surviving after Adam, she was thriving. The life she'd rebuilt from the ashes of her marriage wasn't a consolation prize. It was the life she should have had all along. 6 months after Adam's arrest, the legal proceedings entered their final phase. The once imposing figure of Adam Reed, who had dominated boardrooms and commanded respect with his tailored suits and charismatic smile, now appeared diminished in the stark fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse. Sharon sat in the back row, her presence unnoticed by most, though she felt the weight of every gaze that occasionally flickered in her direction. She wasn't there for closure, not entirely. She was there to witness the culmination of a journey that had begun with a single hotel receipt and ended with the unraveling of an empire built on lies. Adam's plea deal was announced during a brief hearing. Dressed in a rumpled suit that hung loosely on his frame, he stood before Judge Martinez, his voice barely audible as he admitted guilt to 5 counts of tax evasion, 3 counts of securities fraud, and 2 counts of embezzlement from employee pension funds. In exchange for his cooperation against Linda Clark and other co-conspirators, prosecutors agreed to drop several additional charges, including money laundering. The terms of the deal were harsh but pragmatic: 10 years in federal prison with the possibility of early release if he provided substantial assistance to ongoing investigations. Linda, too, had struck a separate agreement. Her role as an active participant in the financial manipulations had been undeniable, but her youth and relative inexperience worked in her favor. She pled guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud, agreeing to testify against Adam in exchange for a reduced sentence of 4 years. The media seized on the narrative of the ambitious young executive assistant seduced by power and greed, painting her as both victim and villain. Sharon watched the news coverage with detached interest, feeling neither anger nor pity. Linda's choices had consequences just as Adam's did, and justice demanded accountability. As the judge handed down Adam's sentence, Sharon felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing him led away in handcuffs, no cathartic sense of revenge. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity of human frailty. Adam wasn't just a criminal. He was also the man she had loved, trusted, and supported for 22 years. His betrayal had shattered her, but it had also freed her in ways she never imagined possible. Sitting there watching him disappear through the courtroom doors, she realized that this moment wasn't about him, it was about her. It marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Sharon found herself in an unexpected encounter at a small cafe near her office. Clara, Adam's longtime assistant, approached her table hesitantly, clutching a paper cup of coffee. Sharon recognized her immediately, the woman who had always greeted her warmly at company functions, who had quietly admired her ability to navigate the complexities of corporate life with grace and poise. Now Clara looked older, wearier, but still carried herself with dignity. "Mrs. Reed," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "May I sit?" Sharon nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her. She hadn't seen Clara since the scandal broke, though she'd heard rumors about the toll it had taken on the employees. Many had lost not only their jobs but also their trust in leadership. For Clara, whose husband had planned to retire using funds from the company's pension plan, the betrayal must have cut especially deep. "I wanted to thank you," Clara said after a moment of awkward silence. Because of what you did, we got most of our pension funds back. Sharon blinked, caught off guard by the gratitude in Clara's voice. I didn't do it for recognition, she replied softly. I couldn't stand by and let him destroy everything. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Still, you saved us. You saved my family. My husband can retire next year like we planned. We thought we'd lost everything. The words struck a chord deep within Sharon. For years she had believed her sacrifices went unnoticed, that her contributions to Adam's success were invisible, even to those who benefited from them. Yet here was Clara, thanking her not for wealth or status but for integrity. It was a validation she hadn't known she needed. I'm glad, Sharon said finally, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. You deserved better than what happened. They talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories of resilience and hope. Clara spoke about how the scandal had forced her to reconsider her own career aspirations, leading her to enroll in night classes to pursue a degree in accounting. Sharon listened intently, offering advice and encouragement. By the time they parted ways, something inside Sharon had shifted. The bitterness she had carried for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of purpose. She wasn't just reclaiming her own life, she was helping others reclaim theirs. In the months following the trial, Sharon threw herself into her work at Davis and Weber Accounting and the New Beginnings Foundation. Her days were filled with analyzing financial statements, training younger staff to recognize warning signs of fraud, and developing programs to support women rebuilding their lives after divorce and financial abuse. Each task brought a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in decades. At night, she returned to her cozy apartment, where the city lights twinkled beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows, casting soft shadows across the walls. The space was modest but perfectly suited to her needs, a reflection of the life she was creating for herself. Her evenings often included phone calls with Laura, who had become more than just a source of professional guidance. Their rekindled friendship blossomed into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Laura introduced Sharon to a network of women who had faced similar challenges, each finding strength in community. Through these connections, Sharon discovered a newfound confidence, not in her ability to endure hardship, but in her capacity to thrive despite it. Lewis Weber, too, became a constant presence in her life. Their professional relationship evolved into a genuine camaraderie, marked by late-night conversations over coffee and shared laughter during stressful audits. Martin admired Sharon's tenacity and insight, qualities that made her an invaluable asset to the firm. For her part, Sharon appreciated his unwavering support and the way he encouraged her to embrace her talents without apology. As spring turned to summer, Sharon noticed subtle changes in herself. She laughed more easily, spoke more confidently, and allowed herself to dream again. Dreams of traveling to places she'd always wanted to visit, of writing the memoir she'd started drafting in stolen moments, of building a legacy that extended beyond her personal triumphs. These dreams weren't born of necessity but of choice, a luxury she had rarely afforded herself during her marriage. On the one-year anniversary of signing the divorce papers, Sharon hosted a dinner party in her new home. The guest list was small but meaningful. Laura, Martin, her sister from Chicago, and 2 colleagues from the foundation. She spent the afternoon preparing simple yet elegant dishes, arranging fresh flowers on the dining table, and setting out candles that cast a warm glow throughout the apartment. As her guests arrived, she greeted each one with a hug, marveling at how different this gathering felt compared to the formal events she used to host. Over glasses of wine and plates of homemade pasta, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They discussed everything from upcoming projects at the foundation to travel plans and favorite books. At one point, Martin raised his glass in a toast. "To Sharon," he said, his voice warm with admiration, "for showing us all what resilience looks like." The room erupted in applause and Sharon felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She stood to respond, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "But this isn't just my story. It's ours. Every step I've taken has been because of the people around me, because of your support, your belief in me when I struggled to believe in myself." Her words hung in the air, punctuated by nods of agreement and murmurs of appreciation. For the first time in years, Sharon felt truly seen. Not as Mrs. Reed, the corporate wife, or Sharon Davis, the whistleblower, but simply as Sharon. A woman who had endured loss, betrayal, and uncertainty, yet emerged stronger and more authentic than ever before. Later that evening, as her guests departed and the apartment grew quiet, Sharon stepped onto her balcony to watch the city lights shimmer in the distance. The cool breeze carried with it the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of new beginnings. She thought about how far she had come, from the woman who had stood frozen in their laundry room holding a hotel receipt, to the woman standing here now, surrounded by love and purpose. Her journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and overwhelming grief. But through it all, she had learned something invaluable. That true strength lies not in enduring hardship but in transforming it into something meaningful. She had reclaimed not only her independence but also her identity, piecing together fragments of herself that had been lost along the way. As she gazed out at the glittering skyline, Sharon acknowledged that her new life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead, uncertainties to face, and dreams yet to be realized. But for the first time in years she felt alive, not just surviving but thriving. And in that moment she knew she had found exactly what she had been searching for all along. A life rich in authenticity, connection, and joy. If Sharon's story resonated with you, please take a moment to like and share this video. It might inspire someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience, justice, and triumph. Together we can create a community that uplifts and supports one another through every chapter of life. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, there's always hope, strength, and the power to rewrite your story. I'll see you again soon with another incredible tale. Until then, take care and keep shining.